Are we ready? Should we start?
We should start.
All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first webinar hosted by the newly created and independent Ageless Living Collaborative, or ALC, as we're fondly calling it. We're delighted that you've taken time to join us this afternoon. I know we're waiting for a few more folks who have registered. So at this moment, we'd just like to talk about our passionate and talented and extremely knowledgeable design professionals who are dedicated to creating optimum outcomes for senior living. And I'd like to introduce our collaborative in a moment. I want to wait until a few more folks sign in. This collaborative is kind of out of thin air. Nobody really knew about it. And the reason is that we had this brainchild no more than a few weeks ago, and it's come together very, very quickly. The collaborative or action-focused think tank was developed in part to educate and discuss and delve into solutions for seniors, senior living, and those who age in place and their caregivers. This week, we're going to tackle our first topic, which is isolation. And we have all seen that whether it's in the media and communities that have faced isolation, families who haven't been able to see family members, isolation has been all around us through COVID and continues in the quasi-post-COVID time period. So how do we address isolation? How do we do better with this? How do we make people's lives better and improve their ability to communicate? So first I'd like to introduce our panel, and I think that we have reached capacity, so I can do that. First up, David Ashen, President and CEO of Dash Design out of New York. We have Lisa Sinney, Founder and President of Mosaic Design from Columbus. You get to wave, Lisa. We have Dale Miller, Founder and Managing Partner of Daring by Design in Boca Raton, Florida. We have Kia Weatherspoon of Determined by Design, and you can all see our nation's capital behind her. Kevin Swanson is coming from Seattle. He's a senior interior designer for Columbia Pacific Advisors. We have Faith Marabella. Wave, Faith. She's president of Wellesley Design out of Wellesley, Massachusetts.
No, out of Haverhill.
Oh, well, there you have it.
Yeah.
A suburb I have never heard of. And Laura Busalacci from outside of Milwaukee, and senior design director. And then we have Jane Rohde, who is outside of Baltimore, and she is principal of JSR Associates. So we really want to thank our panel for joining us today. I am Phoebe Stein, president of Olive Presents. I'm out of the beautiful city of Chicago. So we're going to start this afternoon talking about what's bad about isolation. Why is all this conversation about isolation, and why is it such a big thing? Why is it such a scary thing for people? Faith, would you like to start us off on that?
Yeah, I'd like to just maybe set some basic, understandings around isolation, because we're all coming from different areas on this webinar today. And I think a lot of times we think of isolation in terms of loneliness. So they're not necessarily the same thing. Isolation is a physical manifestation. You can see if somebody's not a part of a group or on their own. Where loneliness is a subjective experience of not being around people. And as social beings that we are, that's the part that I think we talk about a lot. So sometimes we cross over when we're saying loneliness versus isolation or vice versa. So I think that's
so why is isolation so much worse for seniors, Faith? We've heard that this is such a tremendous challenge for seniors, especially during COVID. You know, the rest of us may be with our families, we may be with roommates,
Well,
but seniors
yeah.
alone.
Yeah, actually, statistically, they're saying that isolation affects 1 in 5 older adults. So we're talking 20% of that population that is affected. And the thing about, you know, maybe isolation isn't so bad on its own, but the problem with loneliness, it leads to a lot of health problems. So when you're thinking about, you know, it impacts individual health, community health, and has economic implication as well. Some of the health factors are, you know, you can have high blood pressure, lower your immune response, which is really detrimental right now in the age of COVID. We want to make sure that we have strong seniors can fight off flu and COVID. That also loneliness gives you a risk of increased heart disease. You might experience dementia earlier in life than you normally would have. And then also it increases the risk of death by about 45%. So that's kind of a big deal. That's why we're talking about it.
That's a big deal.
It's a big
So
deal. And
do we
and it
think
costs.
that the isolation, especially during what have been typical socializing times, are what's magnifying this for seniors?
You know, it's interesting because some of the studies that we're seeing now, we've always thought of it in terms of seniors. I mean, a lot of us in this group have worked with seniors. I think that right now, because we're in the age of COVID, we're actually seeing as they're starting to do some studies about that. MIT did a study, and it was really interesting to find that not only, you know, seniors feel isolated, you know, and by generation, we actually increasingly feel more isolation. It's interesting with the Zoomers actually feeling the most isolated. Also, what's important to know is, you know, during COVID, all of those levels went up. And then also the attitudes of recovery were very interesting about, so actually you had, everybody else kind of went back to the pre-COVID expectation about their isolation or loneliness attitudes, except for the Zoomers. Theirs actually improved. So that was pretty exciting. So
Especially since we're on Zoom.
yeah, exactly, and Zoom. So I think, you know, again, even though we focus on seniors, I think that this is something that affects everybody, and that's why I like that we are called Ageless Living, because I think there's a lot of solutions we have by looking at everybody in relation to the things that, you know, we're going to talk about in this session and future sessions. So
well, how can we help the lonely people, as the Beatles called them, all those
the lonely people.
how can we help them?
One of the great things is if we can help instill a sense of purpose in people, if they have a place to go, something to do, and that's part of sometimes, you know, being a part of groups. If there's a way that we can, you know, change their attitude, that have a, you know, positive attitude about aging. So reframing aging is a really big deal. I mean, we are, you know, we know about ageism, and I think people have a certain idea about ageism, and what that means for themselves and in a society. And I think all of us need to adjust. I catch myself all the time, you know, even dealing with seniors, it's not them, you know, we are them and we will be them, you know, it's us, it's all of us together.
Well,
and so
it's
that's
because we're the families. We're the
yes.
families.
Yes.
Well, you know, how can the residents as well as family members communicate without being in the same space? So avoiding that isolation and, you know, communicating, like how do we do that better so that people feel better?
I think there's a lot of solutions. I think technology has filled the gap. I know Lisa Cini, if she's raring to go to talk about some details about that.
Well, I'm actually gonna ask Dale and Kia to jump in here for a second and maybe talk a little bit about residents and family members communicating, not being in the same space. And whoops, we've got wrong art. Here we go. Perfect.
So this is an interesting question. I think go old school. I think this image is really a great way of how people can connect now. Handwritten letters and notes, they take a little bit more thoughtfulness and intentionality to your exchange. But also I think, more frequent check-ins, not these long phone conversations. Prioritize a morning text or a photo or some type of, 10-minute phone call. I remember, I want to say back in the day, there used to be these kind of, prayer groups or, three-way phone calls among family members. I think going back to kind of some of these, intentional connections, it doesn't have to be a Zoom. It doesn't have to be this advanced technology. Just go back to basics with handwritten notes and, daily check-ins and phone calls. I think it's a great way for family members to still connect more frequently.
I agree with that. Actually, this image is a pen pal, if you will, of our very own Maritza Zapata, who is part of our Ageless Living Collaborative team. And she has been corresponding with Dorothea. And I love this image because clearly it makes a difference. There are many organizations like the Phoenix Assisted Care organization. There's something called kindly.org. There are a number of ways that we can connect with seniors in a very direct manner through these organizations, with a letter, with a postcard. As you said, Kia, go old school. A lot of this, we may be ageless, but a lot of our folks living at the top of that age group are not necessarily as technology savvy. And so to write a letter or a postcard is something really meaningful to them.
That's true, Phoebe. And the art of letter writing is not lost on those seniors. They love getting cards and letters, but there are other ways to communicate as well. In our own family, our aunt, who's 109 years old this year, was celebrating her birthday at her senior living community, but she was all alone. And so we organized a Zoom birthday party, and relatives from all over the country jumped onto Zoom at the assigned time and wished her a happy birthday, and it made it a very special occasion for her. So if we can set aside some time each week or each month or once a year even to be able to Skype or FaceTime or Zoom with other people that we know, especially those that are isolated, I think we can bring smiles to their faces. And there's one other unique thing that is being done in a community here in Florida. They have a Wednesday meetup, and relatives actually drive up to the community, park their car, there are umbrellas and fans, and the resident comes out, seats themselves comfortably, and then they can communicate from their seat to the people sitting in the car and enjoy each other's company almost face to face. It's been a tremendous success. So we need to create ways to communicate and to keep communicating with everyone else to eliminate the sense of isolation.
That's a great idea. That's really beautiful.
I think if we remember to keep the human part of as we're integrating with technology, I think we think it's like this other thing. And so, and technology is any sort of tool that you use. So even if that's old school, but it's any of those things that give you those goosebumps and connections. And so, I think I'm glad we're mentioning it.
Any other ideas from the panel? Anybody else want to weigh in on ways that we can combat the isolation and keep residents and family members in communication with one another? I love the idea of the meetup. Jane?
Yeah, just a personal side of it. So my mom and dad are 78 and 80, and they unfortunately don't, and the new computer doesn't have a camera. Who knew that was possible? So with that in mind, every Sunday we watch independently. We watch Sunday morning on CBS, and we watch Face the Nation. And then we have our 2-hour political conversation, and everything else is going on after it. But it has become something that I've actually learned more about my dad. There was a couple things when he was in the Navy. I'd never heard those stories before. And, as much as we visit or try to visit, I haven't seen them since Christmas because of COVID. And those are decisions that we made together. And from that process, though, it's been really interesting because my mom goes, you know, we really look forward to these because I can say anything and it's an open conversation. It's an open forum conversation, but they usually last about 2 hours every Sunday. And then we do a check base during the week, and then we do emails in between. So I sent Dad a book. We have these books that we read that are the same author, and I kind of got him into one guy, Robert Bailey, and so we started exchanging the books back and forth. Well, which was great. Sent him one for Father's Day. Him and Mom read it, and then I got it mailed back to me. You want to talk old school? There's no Kindle. There's no, you know.
That's hilarious.
It's all like.
And my dad and I do the same thing, except for I just bought him the latest Lee Child because we read those, and he's like, "Oh, I already read it." I'm like, "Oh no."
Oh, that's so funny. Well, you know, we've got a couple of questions and some commentary from our folks who are with us on the call. We can't see them, but Sherry Picker said, pen pals with our military overseas is a great way to serve both populations. Being an Army brat, I absolutely agree with that. And our folks serving overseas love to get mail. And that's a great way to communicate with people who maybe know more about isolation than the rest of us, right?
One of the things on being a pen pal, because Kindly is a great thing, but when seniors write, younger kids don't know how to read cursive. That's just a little tip. So if they could print, that would be great.
That's a great suggestion. Good. All right. Well, you know, we've talked a little bit around technology, and we probably need to deal with the beast, right? Because for most of us, it's part of our daily life. For a lot of folks, it just isn't. As Jane indicated, you know, not even having a camera on the computer is really a hindrance if you're trying to communicate now during COVID, post-COVID, and kind of in this new world order. So what are the current technologies that are being used, and what are the newest technologies that have been found to be helpful to our aging population in eliminating that feeling of isolation? Lisa, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, sure. I think the iPad and the smartphone have been invaluable. You know, the only kind of issue is a lot of times you'll end up getting a picture of my dad's ear. And then I'm like, hey, Mom, you might need to, you know, go to the ear doctor, clean that earwax out. Like, you know, we've got it here and then it moves to here so he can hear better. So there's a little bit of that. But there, especially with hearing impairment, having the visual is really critical when you're communicating, because a lot of seniors don't realize how much they read lips. So if they can have earbuds in and see you, plus you can tell when someone's down. And I don't know about you, but there's nothing like when your mom looks at you on a phone, even when you're not together, or your grandmother, and she's like, baby, how's it going? You're like, it's going fine. And she's like, no, I can see it's not going fine. There's something about that they can read, and then we connect on a much deeper level. And when they see that, there's purpose to face point. And I think that helps make it important. On the laptops, the tablets, which are super easy to use, phones, some communities have Temi or little robots that drive around. And you can do not only televisits with, you know, your doctor, but you can talk to your family and friends.
That's great. That's really
great. And just from a point standpoint, everybody thinks it's FaceTime. So not everyone has an iPhone. So you don't want to create extra difficulty. You want to use something that's kind of agnostic. It might be a WhatsApp, it might be Skype, Zoom, or something on Facebook. But don't assume that everybody has the same thing that you do. I even see it with professionals where someone has an iPad versus a PC, and our Zooms look completely different, and we don't know how to help each other.
Right. Well, I have that with my family who are in Florida, and they are not Mac users, as I am. And so we have to communicate through WhatsApp. You know, you have to figure a way that works, right?
There was a little bit of prejudice there. I heard it. There was that Mac.
You know, I haven't used a PC in a long time. So, you know, there are ways around that.
Alexa is a great tool also, because you can actually do calls through Alexa and Loop and some other products that are out there.
And I know there's some communities that have actually issued out iPads and pre-programmed iPads, and they might even be like a fancy Kindle, and they've got, a dozen buttons on them. Like, here's the cat of the day. Here's if you want to call your daughter. Here's if you want to, and it's really great. And not only communities where, whether it's nursing home, assisted living, independent living, because it allows staff to be able to check in too. So it's been used by like Home Instead and some of the places that, it's really helping to bridge that gap where you said that maybe somebody doesn't have something available to them. And I was really happy to see a sample of that the other day. It's really slick.
Those are all great ways to connect, and certainly whether it's connecting with family or other neighbors, even within a community, they're more, you might call it entertainment or, a different connection, but there's also that technology for medical. And, Lisa brought up the robot. We have a question from Elliot Schreiber, who asks, what is your view on wearable tech related to biosensors to help remote care for seniors, particularly overnight?
I'm a
Who would like to take that?
I'm a huge believer in wearable tech. I think it is not about it being invasive and invading anyone's privacy. It's about being proactive and allowing them to have more freedom. Right. So when someone waits till there's a crisis, that's when they end up in a nursing home or potentially the hospital or don't come home. When we're proactive and we can see that mom got up 5 times in the middle of the night, there might be a UTI or her medication might be off or something's wrong. And to be able to handle that before there's a major event allows mom to have a better quality of life. So I think, you weigh it, and I've used technology. I used it with my grandmother and my parents. It also pushes a little bit, I need it. I wear something for my doctor, and sometimes you need to be told to get up out of your chair and move around a bit, especially during this season.
Right. And sometimes you wind up with parents who are reticent to use any of that. They don't want a medallion on. They don't want to have an electronic leash. And, so that's a little bit of a battle that we have to have strategies to address as well.
Right. Along with a lot of patience.
Exactly.
It's very challenging, very challenging.
I think for me, sometimes the technology, I've even learning from technology, and I am not one of our residents, but I want to give a shout out to my mom, who is actually in and listening to this webinar, my biggest fan out there. She figured this out. She's on her iPad, I assume. So I wanted just to kind of, as us getting older, we'll have these technologies, but I think to integrate these into our current residents is super, super important, because this is how I will communicate with my mom more often than not. And now she's on watching this, and I'm kind of impressed she's actually doing this. So
that is awesome.
Hey, mom.
But you hit the nail on the head, Kevin, is that she had a reason to learn the technology. Yes.
Right.
So my dad's reason is to keep up with the sports scores and ESPN and Ohio State football.
There you go.
And there are people out there who are playing bridge between them through technology and lots of other games and fun things to do. So it's not just medical, it can be fun for people of all ages.
Absolutely.
And you can be playing games with your grandchildren or your children or other family members all over the world.
Yeah.
100%.
There's also an intergenerational component to that too, because one of my colleagues, she opened a new senior center in Wake Forest, and obviously because of COVID, all of a sudden everything flipped. So everything that had been in person, they brought students in. The students helped the rest of the residents and participants to be able to know how to go home and be able to still participate in their exercise class, to do whatever the activity might be. So I think this idea and opportunity to have students be able to do that is a good, it's good for both sides. And it's funny because when we talk about the Zoomers and the Boomers, they do have a lot of things in common. And I think that this is one where it's a reverse mentoring opportunity that we don't often see. And I think that that's a real positive. It was a positive before, but I think now it's become an essential positive instead of just an option.
Jane, that is perfect. Like to learn what someone how they were in World War I or World War II, and to hear that firsthand. I think how much I enjoy Hamilton, and I would actually learn something if class was taught like that. Like to learn that from someone that was actually fought in those wars, I think would be so beneficial for the students.
Yeah, it's a different way of looking at it. It's experiential learning instead of rote.
Yeah.
Right.
How many dates? Architectural history class was not my favorite.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we're looking at some gamers here, and they're not what you would typically associate as gamers. It's not the 20-year-olds, and they might be in an altered state, or they just might really enjoy the game. But can we talk about gamification and how it can reduce isolation and maybe even depression? And is this typical for our aging community to be, doing games and wearing VR glasses and the like?
It's not typical, but when you do it, the HTC, which is one of the largest virtual reality companies, which is what they're wearing. And I was kind of anti-virtual reality because I thought my mom would never want her hair to get messed up. But what the studies show is that when you're in a virtual reality situation, if it's scary, you actually feel scared. And if you're in a happy situation, you actually feel happy, even to the point you're almost as happy with a virtual reality situation as having your family visit. So companies like Rendover, they see a 40% increase in happiness. So right now, you might not have family. There's a lot of people that just don't have family. And so what do? They can do things like this. You can experience Rome or go back to where you grew up. You can do all kinds of wonderful things. It's not about first-person killer video games. And I think that's what we often think.
I'd like to just point out optimism, bringing optimism into your life can actually, you can extend it by 7.5 years. So I think that's a pretty good motivator. So, using tools like this.
Right.
To get happy. I mean, that's
So strap on the glasses and go to a vineyard, right?
There you are.
Exactly right.
We have a question on isolation vis-a-vis design. And so everybody here is involved in design. Bertram Schwaderlap, and I hope I haven't made a mess of your name, asked the question, besides the use of technologies that require time and coordination from both, I also see the feeling of isolation through the design of rooms and facilities, small windows, brown trim. What trend are we seeing in making the design creating a better feel? Will COVID start a trend of redesign?
Yeah.
Who would like to take
question.
that?
And I think it's yet to be determined. There's a lot of conversations about how design will change because of COVID. It may not change a ton. It might just be modifications. It's still too new, and there's literally tons of conversations.
I think
imagine.
I think we have two major conversations going on about COVID. Sort of like, what are we doing in the immediate to have solutions? So, and I thought it was really interesting. EFA's keynote speaker on June 1st, and it's free. Anybody else who wants to go and find it, but they did a lovely sort of diagram of here's your dining room, and then first phase, getting everybody back. Second phase is, moving things around. This is what you can do if there's shields. But then the long-term things, do we start looking at, do we do anti-rooms that are into, like, especially, in skilled nursing facilities? So, and I say it's SNFs, so that's the technical, or a lot of people call them homes, but that's a different level of care. But I think that we want to look at that and probably design with more options so that we know that, we might not have to wait another 100 years for something like this to pop up, and how are we going to deal with it? So I think we are being really nimble. We're hot-footing it through this and not trying to get ourselves locked into one prescriptive, solution.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of communities out there with existing footprints that do have large dining rooms that you could break up into smaller sections if need be. So, yeah, to your point, Faith.
And connection to the outdoors is something Bertram mentions, and I think we're seeing in the communities we're developing now, more emphasis on outdoor space, more emphasis on visual connections, and how we can bring the outdoors in as well, and that's going to be important.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? we're going to move into small house models, which is something that maybe a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with. A lot of great reasons to become familiar with that. But how are they faring versus the traditional institutional models as it relates to COVID specifically? Jane, you want to jump in and talk about it?
This is like my favorite topic, Phoebe. Thank you. So I wanted to share some research with you guys. So the small house model and what we call residential assisted living, a RAL, RAL, or small house or household. The Greenhouse Project kind of kicked that off about 15 years ago. So the Greenhouse Project was started by Dr. Bill Thomas. Some of you may or may not know. Great guy to look up, incredible visionary. People outside of our industry was like, yeah, so it's a small house, ha ha. You know, but it really is. It's basically taking and deinstitutionalizing everything we know about institutionalized life. And so some of my colleagues at the Greenhouse Project, I asked them for some of the research. They've started a research project when COVID started. And so I have some stats I wanted to share with you guys. And some of them are very sobering, but some of them are also good news. So part of this.
Let's start with the good news first, shall we?
No, we kind of can't, because then the good news will be the good part. Right?
I tried, guys.
Yeah, you tried, thanks. So as of June 27, 2020, we had at least 57,000 deaths in the nursing home assisted living industry. And the July 23rd stat, and this is through the New York Times database that they do, at least 59,000 residents and workers have died. 42% of the deaths in the US are in our industry. And so I find this completely unacceptable. I also think that our system has been broken for a long time. So this opportunity, if we can't change and make things better now, I don't know what would happen to do that, right? So the Greenhouse Project, that means you would have 10 to 12 residents living in a grouping, and that could be attached to other groupings. But also this idea of dedicated staff, a living wage, treating the group as a family, doing the correct testing for the staff so that people can be together. That addresses that isolation component.
Jane, can I interrupt you a moment? Because you said something about a dedicated staff, and I want people who don't already know to understand why that is such an important piece. And what we have today in most models with basically traveling staff that go from one community to another. And in the case of COVID, unfortunately, have been caring from one community to another. So that's why this is a really important point.
Yeah, so dedicated staff basically means that that group is paid a living wage and doesn't have to work in 2 or 3 or more facilities. That is how it is spread. And before we had any testing in place, the two components are, even with a emergency preparedness plan, which isn't always up to date in a long-term care setting, but also the fact that the staff is moving from facility to facility and no PPE. So you combine that all together, and it kind of is asking for the most vulnerable population to be exposed. I think that's why you have the same thing in incarceration in prisons, and you could also have that in group homes with children. So this isn't necessarily just an elder issue. This is a systems issue, I think. And with that dedicated staff, if you can have dedicated staff, then they're not moving from facility to facility. You may have seen the article in France where the staff all just moved in with the elders and they just kind of kept on going. And so that kept all the isolation to a minimum, no PTSD, no severe mental health issues after the fact, et cetera, et cetera. So, but then the small house model, the reason I think this is the time for this to completely shine is, I'm just going to give you some rough stats. So there's a number of group homes that were evaluated for Greenhouse. And so the organizations are skilled assisted living and family care. So that's 256 greenhouses. Okay. That's 2,674 residents. Okay. Number of homes with positive cases are 14, which is a great percentage. 47 confirmed positive cases and 4 deaths.
Wow.
So you look at that in comparison. So that's talking about Greenhouse versus elder deaths on the national nursing home circuit, 0.42% in the small house model versus 27.5% in the institutionalized model. That stat alone to me points out that we're here, man. This is what we need to be doing. And so we've been opening what we call residential assisted living. It can be licensed as group home, can be licensed as assisted living, depends on the state. They're all different. But basically it's a home and it has 8 to 10 folks, generally speaking. And we believe that there's 30,000 of them across the United States. There's an organization in the Arizona area called RALNA. It's ARNA. ARNA is what they call themselves, RALNA. And but that organization and group, I think that's just going to expand this, just exponentially. So this gives us an opportunity to allow seniors to be in the communities that we're in, with the care models coming together. So we could even see that from, I read an article today about education, and that families are going to start coming together and co-teaching to do homeschooling for their children. I think we're going to see family to family, neighbor to neighbor come together and start caring for elders the same way. And I think as that starts to happen, right? So it's family to family instead of business to business.
Love that idea. And there are going to be so many more folks doing homeschooling. I know that, we know friends who are doing that. We've got that happening in our own family. Do you think that the small house model and the success of that is going to then influence the rethinking in the design of the communities in the future, given that we've now experienced COVID?
We're hoping. So there's kind of a couple of different mindsets. So some of the real estate investment trusts just think that there's a volume there's so many elders that they can just keep doing exactly what they're doing and someone will need their model, right? I don't necessarily agree with that. But I think that there will be some of the same. But I think people who really want to make a difference and are caring for their elders and seniors are going to start looking at alternative models. And what does that mean? And how do we keep people healthier in place, whether it's, home healthcare agencies, outpatient rehab that come to the home, whatever the services are. I think if we can deliver meals through Uber Eats and we can do transportation with Lyft, we certainly can bring whatever service a person needs. So until you get into the higher levels of dementia and end-time care, and even a lot of end-time care can be taken care of within the home. So I think it's a mindset shift of how we deliver care and service.
Hey, Jane. Oh, sorry. David, go ahead. You had a question.
No, I was going to say, because I've been thinking about how we take this model, because I'm working on some communities that are 30 years old, that are large communities, and how we start to take this thinking and retrofit these very large communities and start to subdivide them. That's super interesting to me and a challenge. And Kevin, you're going to say.
I was just going to ask Jane, so on these smaller projects then, and my background is more of that developer entity, how, with the staff situation of keeping that staff on, would there be built-in apartments for staff if needed in these smaller projects, or how does that work?
That depends. That's a great question. So we have 2 that we're doing that out of 4 right now in Virginia, and one of them happens to have a lower level because of the grade on the site. And it's a residential lot is what they're using. But we'll be able to have one care provider basically lives underneath in terms of that. You don't have to do it that way though. You can still staff, 2-2 and 1, 2-2-2 and 1, depending on, how many residents you have.
Right.
So for the most part, we're looking at 1 chef and 2 universal workers is kind of what we've been looking at. And so in this model, Live Together, that we've been working on, we want to see if we can get authorities to agree that 1 apartment with 8 bedrooms is 1 dwelling unit. And if we could accomplish that, we could provide services without this heavier licensure that I don't think is necessarily needed to provide the care and services that we need. Right. And it has to be integrated. It has to be integrated with whether it's a home healthcare agency or in our case, we have apartments that would all have access to all the service. So trying to look at it differently in terms of what's the staff look like. And you can share staff. You don't have to, we have a small dedicated unit for assisted living. You can share staff for other populations. There's nothing against it in the regulation that doesn't allow you to do that. So you could have a very small, say 8, 16, maybe 32 at the most residents, but you could share that staffing across other populations to try to make it more affordable. And that was something that it took me a while to figure that out, that people weren't going to penalize me if I wanted to add staff differently. You know?
And you don't
So
have
you're
to do
you're
just one
talking-
home. You can do, like we've done them where there are 8 to 10 residents per house, and it's a house.
Right.
And there's 12 to 20 of those homes around a community center.
Right.
And that way you share a commercial kitchen and some housekeeping staff and ground staff, but you still have that group home mentality.
We've tried to do what David's talking about too. We took a dementia wing, it was 26 residents, and we basically blew up the middle of it, and we were able to create a mini household. And yes, they still had some commercial components, but the difference in the access to daylight, the access to outdoors, and for whatever reason, we have all these windows hidden in old soiled utility rooms. I don't understand why and how those got
Because
there.
they were something else at some point, who knows?
Yeah, I mean,
I have a question I want to ask from Daniel Collins, who wants to know what is the overall cost impact of converting a community to this new model? I think probably a lot of folks are asking that question. Any feedback?
If you're doing renovation work anyway, and now that the CMS regulations are shifting back so that they allow more flexibility, there were some issues there, but that's getting taken care of. So that the cost within it, it's more about reevaluating your operational costs more than the design costs. So if you can look at the operational model, and a lot of it readjusts the middle management group and reassigns them in a sense. So it's not that you have to get rid of staff, but you need everyone to be brought on board as to the care and the model. So then when it doesn't work and when it's too expensive is when you try to operate a small house like it's an institutional model, because you can't and make it affordable. So it's looking at that staff model and rearranging and redoing the staff model. And then once they can see how that can work and then they see the outcomes, then that's how you do the savings part of it. The actual construction part isn't really that much different. We haven't found in cost.
We have another question from Jane Snell Simpson, and she asks, we need more walkable communities. We need the zoning rules to be altered to allow these communities. We need a mixture of all ages in these communities. I think that speaks to something that a few of you are already involved in. And shared responsibilities and taking care of each other, coming from a general contracting and remodeling point of view. So Jane's question kind of reminds me of the old, or in the earlier days of senior living, when it was a big community in the West with lots of room and lots of activities. It's changed a lot over the years. It's not, that orientation anymore. So you want to take that on, Jane or Lisa?
Actually, I just wanted to speak to that as far as, some of that Our House Greenhouse model is about people taking responsibility and charge within their own environment. So it's not necessarily just staff. You're engaging the residents to take care of each other too. So there's a whole different shift about, a pure community in that instance. So I just
does that become multi-generational, or are you asking residents who are similarly aged to take care of each other?
Well, right now the Our House Greenhouse is predominantly, senior, but I think there's some stuff Jane's doing that's really exciting, that where we're starting to talk about not only, multi-generational in one household, but also looking at, when we're talking about costs, offsetting that you can have, we a lot of times have to have affordable housing, and you end up, developers want to plunk something over there, and integrating it into these cottage models so that it's integrated, but you're still taking care of one another and having those services so that you can do that balance and still serve the community. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
I know Lisa and Jane both want to jump in.
So to kind of kick it up another notch. So in our case, we've been looking at 55 plus is kind of a dumb thing. 55 plus was created so that people could develop land that normally they wouldn't be able to develop because they were going to use services, right? So it's kind of made up. But the nice part about it is that 20% of that can be under 55. So we've been starting to look at students, at-risk youth, and families as the 20%, and the seniors being the other percent. And actually, I just finished a pro forma for this yesterday. We sent it out to a developer in Detroit that we've been working with, and looking at a sliding scale for 30% of AMI. to be able to provide some units. We're not going to be able to provide everything affordable. The hardest part is getting that assisted living number down. I mean, we have clients that are charging $9,000 to $12,000 a month, and we would like that to be around $2,500, and that's just not going to happen the way it's structured right now. So we've been working on some other alternatives to that to try to slide the scale down for workforce development, so that our at-risk youth, our students, can also afford to live in the community they're working in. So it's all tied together, and people are like, oh, this is complicated. I'm like, well, you kind of strip out the different pieces and parts. I mean, Faith has seen me go through this, but you kind of look at the different parts and you kind of put them together. It actually can be very systematically evaluated across the board. And so right now they're looking at how to make that all work with debt service and all the other, financial parts of all of that, pieces and parts. But I think that we're looking at the engagement center as not a community center only, but as a means for making money. So if we can do education and training for other community providers, for students, for whoever, and make that an income center, that's how we're going to offset to get the rents down for the few that we can do it for. So
we sure need to get the rents down, because everybody can't afford $12,000 a month. That's for sure.
We have a project up in the northern United States, not the East Coast, but they have a wedding center. So they have a big banquet center. So, you have not only kind of apartments, but you have this community thing where events are coming on, and you'll see residents just kind of like bombing the wedding, like, coming in, and like, you don't know if that's your great uncle or not. Like, you have no idea. But,
wedding crashers.
Which is like, yeah, they're wedding crashers, which is fantastic. And then, we also have other people that are using college students and saying, hey, we're going to give you a reduced rent, especially music students. Because they're kind of a little bit more, they're not like the party rave all night long. And they have to do maybe 10 hours of performances in the home as part of their reduced rate. And they've got to practice anyways when you're at that level. So I think finding some middle ground is very beneficial. And it'll be interesting to see when the colleges come back online, because at least in Ohio, one of our universities wants to put senior focused in the dorms, because they said within the first 6 months, if you don't engage a student, they've been told by their mom and dad they're perfect and they're awesome and they're the best thing since sliced bread, then they go to college and it's not like that. And they need to have that kind of senior wisdom and person connecting. And so they're looking at freshmen and then, 55, 60 and older living in a dorm, which the studies that I've read is a lot of seniors would love to be on a college campus. You have access to free education, you have a fitness center, you have a cafeteria, and you have youth around you.
Right. I'm going to move the topic a little bit, not too far, but we're about 10 minutes out from our timetable. And I want to talk about the challenges that surround dining and how to keep people safe and not isolated during their dining times. How to set up a dining room today, because our standards and our requirements are different. What are communities doing about their staff, and how are they keeping illness out as their staff tends to the people in those communities? So here we have an image. Kevin, you want to talk about the dining and what's going on here?
Yeah, so this is a community that I recently installed, and it looks like they've put up some 4th of July decor after I had left. But anyway, I had finished setting up the whole dining room, and then they kind of came back in, and as I was leaving, they were setting it up like this, and I thought, what's happening? I just spent so much time. And they were telling me a little bit about what they were doing as they were testing this out. Now, this building doesn't have any residents yet. However, they were setting this up, I think, for tours and how they can now safely have people in the dining room. However, I think this is a really great solution. One, these particular buildings that are doing this is through the operator that we work with. They're brand new buildings, and so of course they have very few residents right now. And what I think is ingenious is they are using what they have because they don't have the income coming in yet. But look, we can sit 4 people at those tables. They can see each other. They can talk. Hopefully they can hear each other. But they have well enough distance away from each other, yet they can still come into the dining room. and enjoy a meal. There's also on the, they were putting 3 tables straight in a line, and they were saying that these were reserved for couples. So you can kind of see at the lower right, or lower left, sorry, is that little sign says reserved for couples. And so at one end you have a couple there, and at the opposite corner, the other end is another couple. So of course they can always dine together. But with our big dining rooms like this, you know, you can rest assured you can have some distance between everybody. I think this is a really good solution. Some of the other things that this community was doing, or this particular operator was doing, is they were having smaller menus, but changing it more often. So of course, there's something to look forward to when you come to dine. I think one of the coolest things they were talking about was doing a food truck, and where the residents could actually leave their apartment and social distance, wait in line, and they could go to a food truck and get their meal, and then obviously either maybe go dine in the dining room at a distance, or maybe go back into their homes or their apartments to eat their meal. But at least they had that little bit of social time between. And I think this is coming back to our seeing everybody, even though there's residents living in these buildings, in these communities, they don't always get to see each other. So I think this is a great opportunity. Meals are what they live for, right? So
not unlike the rest of us, we were all looking forward to finally being able to go to a restaurant, you know, even outside.
Right.
Can't wait to go dining again.
Yeah, I can't wait. So
I think Dale wanted to.
I think that's great.
You know, when it comes to dining, whether it's senior living or at home, I think that the beginning of designing really begins with the chef and understanding the chef's needs and his staff's needs and their ideas, and being sure that we're checking their temperatures, COVID testing, contract tracing, not just the residents, but the staff, and that the staff themselves, as they're serving, should be wearing gloves and change them frequently. And I think that if we make it a more simplistic way to dine, where people can pre-select their meals, we don't have printed menus. You get it on the internet, or you get it on your iPad, or there's a large blackboard or a large monitor within the dining room, then I think that people can make their choices a good deal more easily. Also, making reservations. And you know, there's the joke about the wife who does it best because she makes reservations rather than meals. Well, reservations are really important when it comes to senior living. They then have something to look forward to. Right. And then when it comes to setting up the dining room, I think Kevin made some great points about social distancing, but we can also create very decorative transparent shields, not just pieces of plexi, but those shields that become a part of the decor, not as an afterthought, making them artistic elements of design on the tables, and then in adjoining areas, it becomes an element of the design, and you don't just have a bunch of tables and chairs in a dining room, which could be visually unappealing. Right. So
and I think that,
things to think about.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with shields, it's great because you can see somebody's mouth, but we are talking about a lot of people, myself included, that have a little bit of hearing impairment and I guess talking impairment too today. So, you know, that's one of those things that when we're talking about these big spaces where the sound goes, you know, up, up, and up too. We have to take those into consideration. I don't know if even just, if it's about, you know, if we're talking about barriers, but maybe even between tables or between, you know, where we'd have something that had decorative screens that are acoustic so that you can start to isolate sound, you know, to various tables or, you know, smaller parties of people. So, so kind of has that ripple effect that when we start doing, you know, one thing, you know, we have to think of those other things too. So
I think that's good for all of us, not just our aging communities.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you a question quickly. Do we see the end of the large dining room? I mean, do we think that, I mean, I see that we can still have a large kitchen and then start to subdivide the spaces, thinking about grab and go markets. That kind of has happened in the hotel industry to allow more choice and also allow more intimacy. So it helps to buffer the sound issue, but also helps to buffer the issue with spread of, you know, viruses in this case.
I think we do. I mean, our new builds that we're designing have multiple venues that are much smaller. And the first thing that you hear is, well, somebody's going to complain because they're going to have to wait. Well, good. When you go out to a restaurant, you have to wait if that's your place, and it's going to force you to try out different locations. Sure. If you're in there forever, it's kind of nice to sit at a different place for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or go to the pub versus the cafe, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I saw your walkthrough. It was great because I saw the pizza oven you were showing when you did the walkthrough. Those little, it was great.
If you
Yeah, I
look
like
at
that idea too.
Garden
Sorry,
Spot
Jane. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. If you look at Garden Spot Village up in New Holland in Pennsylvania, they've done just that. And it's everything from the where you have your cup hanging on the wall kind of thing, like little rooster cafe, to this amazing, it's just an amazing, almost Panera, better than Panera experience. But it has all these different segments and stuff. And then they used all the local culture of the Amish culture and everything as part of their decor. And it does exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's super successful if you want to check that out.
Cool.
I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
No, I just kind of said it, but back to that question about how the design could affect this. I think, you know, we have a very large dining space. It's 2 stories tall. We do have some acoustic issues, but we are bringing back booths into our dining rooms, and the booths are not necessarily along a wall, but they're kind of an X. And so social distancing with a 42-inch square table, they're still not far enough across from you, but I think going beyond this and as aesthetics or breaking up these smaller spaces, the booths are going to be a good idea that will break and become more intimate dining spaces, and inevitably will probably help in another situation that we're having now. If we don't fill them all up, at least we have these barriers where I think people will feel more comfortable in these dining spaces. I just think the idea is great to have smaller and more options. I know that's probably a bigger stress on the kitchen itself, but you know, who knows, maybe maybe when we're through all this, the general public can come in and share meals at these restaurants too, so.
Yeah.
And we're going to let Kevin, having had the last word, because we're out of time. And I want to make sure that we can just cover a few housekeeping issues, which is number 1, we will have a website soon, and we'll let everybody know when that is up and going. Our webinars will live on the website, as will white papers and all sorts of other information. You can look forward to an upcoming webinar by our panel, and we will continue to tackle issues that are relevant to not only COVID, post-COVID, but also everyday senior community, aging community challenges. And we welcome your input and your feedback. A special thank you to Maritza Zapata, who helped us tremendously. Without her, we wouldn't be here today. And she put a Herculean amount of work into this so that we can all be here with you. Thank you again to everybody who joined us today. I hope you all learned a lot about isolation and how that impacts and can be resolved better for our aging community as well as for ourselves. And thank you again for joining us. I'd like to thank all the panelists, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody back again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.